Hello and welcome to Indus News live from Islamabad. I'm Jawad Tehami and these are the headlines. Japan's longest-serving Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has announced his resignation for health reasons. Abe says his ulcerative colitis worsened last month and he did not want his illness to affect policy decisions. The resignation will now trigger a vote within Abe's Liberal Democratic Party to replace him as president and will be followed by parliamentary elections for a new PM. US President Donald Trump has formally accepted the re-nomination for a second term on the fourth and the final night of the Republican National Convention. Trump will face the Democratic candidate Joe Biden in the presidential election on the 3rd of November. Amnesty International has asked India to investigate allegations of human rights violations by police during the Delhi riots. In a report, the rights watchdog said it has documented videos showing police pelting stones with the rioters, torturing people and dismantling protest sites. Earlier this year, more than 50 people were killed during the Hindu-Muslim clashes over the protests on the controversial citizenship law. Amnesty says the majority of those killed were Muslims. In Pakistan, the death toll from torrential rains across the country has risen to 133 as 43 more people died in the last 24 hours. The police say 25 people lost their lives in the record-breaking rains in the port city of Karachi. The authorities say 18 others died in rain-related incidents in Punjab, Balochistan and Khyber Pakhtunkhwa provinces. India has recorded its highest COVID-19 spike with over 77,000 cases and 1,057 deaths in the past 24 hours. The country's death toll has exceeded 61,000 with more than 3.3 million infections. In Pakistan, 9 people lost their lives to the disease overnight, taking the toll to 6,283 with over 295,000 confirmed cases. Globally, the virus has claimed over 832,000 lives while infecting more than 24.4 million people. Those are the headlines and detailed stories right after a short break. Welcome back, and now for the news in detail. Japan's longest-serving Prime Minister Shinzo Abe has announced his resignation for health reasons. In a press conference, Abe said his ulcerative colitis worsened last month and he did not want his illness to affect the policy decisions. A visibly distraught Abe said he could not continue as he needed to respond to the people's support and confidence in him. The outgoing premier said the new leadership will take up the challenge to tackle the pandemic. The resignation will now trigger a vote within Abe's Liberal Democratic Party to replace him as president and will be followed by parliamentary elections for a new PM. And for more on this, we are joined by Dr. Stephen Nagy, political analyst from Japan. Thank you for your time at Indus News. Do you see Prime Minister Abe's approval ratings or any factor other than health that might have led to his resignation?
So over the past 6 months, I think that the Prime Minister Abe has experienced tremendous stress in terms of dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic domestically, but also regional international issues, including balancing the U.S.-Japan relationship, trying to sign a fifth political document with China, as well as belligerents from North Korea. I think it's the collective pressure that has brought stress and caused a reoccurrence of his intestinal bowel disease, which has pushed him to make the decision to resign today as Prime Minister of Japan.
How will Prime Minister Abe's resignation affect national, regional and global politics?
This is an excellent question. Thank you. So I think that we can understand his legacy and how it's going to affect moving forward at those three levels. First, domestically, I think that when we assess Prime Minister Abe's record, what we can say is that there was not enough commitment to structural reforms to push the Japanese economy into different, in a more positive direction. That being said, I think that there are some important reforms that he's adopted domestically. For example, modest migration reform. Second, corporate governance reform. Third, pushing womenomics. And again, I think that he could have done more here, but he's pushed the topic of including women and promoting diversity and inclusion in a much positive direction. Regionally, I think when we look at the importance of the Abe administration and how it will go forward, I think there's a few areas that we can look at. First, South Korea-Japan relations. I think Prime Minister Abe, being a conservative, and some in quarters they call him a nationalist, did attempt to push South Korea-Japan relations in a positive direction by signing the 2015 December Comfort Women Agreement. Unfortunately, with the election of President Moon in South Korea in 2017, bilateral relations have spiraled in a very, very negative direction, and they're probably at a post-World War II low. The second important relationship that I think Prime Minister Abe will be known for is resuscitating the Sino-Japanese relationship. When he became Prime Minister in December 2012, the relationship was at really a historic low. But through hard work, backdoor diplomacy, and working with the Communist Party of China and Japan's Liberal Democratic Party, they were able to put the relationship back to a functional state, focusing on their economic relationship and trying to put those difficult political and historical issues away. This has in part been facilitated, of course, by the hardline approach by the Trump administration on China. In other areas, I think Prime Minister Abe has been very consequential in terms of signing the Comprehensive, Progressive and Trans-Pacific Partnerships, supporting the Japan-EU Economic Partnership Agreement, and lastly, I think really importantly, working with the EU to sign an Asia connectivity project that's meant to try and build infrastructure connectivity within the region. These are really important.
Dr. Stephen, political analyst, joining us from Japan. Thank you very much for your time. I would really appreciate that. Now, moving on, U.S. President Donald Trump has formally accepted the renomination for a second term on the fourth and the final night of the Republican National Convention. In his address from the White House, Trump promised brighter horizons amid racial turmoil, economic collapse, and a pandemic. Trump slammed his Democratic opponent, Joe Biden, saying the former vice president will endanger American safety. He said his administration has spent the last 4 years reversing the damage Biden had inflicted over his 47 years in politics. Echoing U.S. Vice President Mike Pence's words, Trump branded Biden as a Trojan horse for socialism, saying he will not be able to stand up to the radical left. The president said the Democratic liberal elite will pass legislation to defund law enforcement across the country.
Make no mistake, if you give power to Joe Biden, the radical left will defund police departments all across America. They will pass federal legislation to reduce law enforcement nationwide. They will make every city look like Democrat-run Portland, Oregon. No one will be safe in Biden's America. My administration will always stand with the men and women of law enforcement.
Trump will face Biden in the presidential election on the 3rd of November. Biden currently leads a Republican candidate on most polls. Now, moving on, Amnesty International has asked India to investigate allegations of human rights violations by police during the Delhi riots. In a report, the rights watchdog said it has documented videos showing police pelting stones over the rioters, torturing people, and dismantling a protest site. Earlier this year, more than 50 people were killed during the Hindu-Muslim clashes over protests on controversial citizenship law. Amnesty says the majority of those killed were Muslims. The human rights watchdog said the Delhi police were complicit and an active participant in the violence. It said the police acted inadequately in preventing the riots. Amnesty said the police brutalities also include the denial of medical services to victims. It said hate speech by the ruling Bharatiya Janata Party leaders also contributed to the violence. India has recorded its highest COVID-19 spike with over 77,000 cases and 1,057 deaths in the past 24 hours. Globally, the virus has claimed over 830,000 lives while infecting more than 24.3 million people. More in this report.
The new coronavirus continues to devastate India, setting grim records every day. The country has the world's fourth highest death toll of over 61,000 and third highest infection tally of more than 3.3 million. Over in Latin America, the cases toll has crossed the 7 million mark despite some countries reporting a decline in infection. US President Donald Trump says mass production of vaccines that are in their final phase has already begun.
Under Operation Warp Speed, we have 3 different vaccines in the final stage of trials right now, years ahead of what has been achieved before. Nobody thought it could ever be done this fast. Normally it would be years, and we did it in a matter of a few months. We're producing them in advance so that hundreds of millions of doses will be quickly available. We will have a safe and effective vaccine this year, and together we will crush the virus.
As many countries grapple with the second wave of the virus in Europe, Germany is set to extend a ban on major events until the year's end. Sweden says it will allow concert goers and soccer fans back into venues from October under limited attendance. Spain has declared face masks mandatory for children aged 6 and over as the country prepares to open schools. Meanwhile, France is battling a new post-lockdown spike in infections.
The infection rate during the peak of the epidemic was around 1,000 out of 100,000, 20 times more than today. But it is precisely now then that we need to act, because the spread of the epidemic can be exponential if we do not react quickly.
New cases in Australia's second most popular state of Victoria continue to worry the government. Mainland China has managed to keep a lid on domestic transmissions while imported cases continue to emerge. Meanwhile, South Korea has recorded 371 infections in the last 24 hours.
In Pakistan, 9 people have lost their lives to COVID-19 over the past 24 hours, raising the toll to 6,283. The Health Ministry says 415 more people tested positive for the virus, taking the tally to over 295,000. The ministry said the recovery rate from the disease is over 94%. It said 280,000 have recovered from the disease, while 644 patients are in critical condition. The ministry said the number of active cases has reduced to nearly 9,000. Sindh remains the worst hit province, witnessing nearly 129,000 infections, while Punjab has reported over 96,000 cases so far. The Arab coalition fighting in Yemen says it has downed a ballistic missile launched by the Houthi rebels towards Saudi Arabia. In a statement, coalition spokesman Turki al-Maliki says the forces intercepted and destroyed a projectile aimed at civilians in Najran. He said the Houthis continue to break the Stockholm Agreement and the Hudaydah ceasefire. Maliki said the rebels' actions are a credible threat for regional and international security. The spokesman said the coalition will continue to confront such hostile and terrorist acts. Yemen has been marred by violence since 2014 after Houthis overran much of the country, including the capital Sana'a. In Lebanon, 2 people have been killed and 3 others wounded during clashes in Khalideh town, south of Beirut. The Lebanese army said it has deployed units in the town to control the situation and restore order. The military said it has arrested 4 people in connection with the clashes. Eyewitnesses reported heavy gunfire and fires blazing in nearby buildings. The confrontation erupted days after a row over a banner marking the Shiite Muslim Ashura religious ritual. Iraq says 3 Katyusha rockets struck Baghdad's heavily fortified green zone, which houses foreign missions, including the U.S. consulate. The Iraqi military said the rockets were fired from the Baya neighborhood. It said the projectiles fell in an empty area and caused no significant damage. Yesterday, a rocket also landed in Jadariya neighborhood, which is close to the green zone. No group has so far claimed the responsibility for the attacks. More stories to follow right after a short break. Welcome back. Israel says it has targeted Hamas military posts in airstrikes on the Gaza Strip. The military said the raids were conducted in retaliation to 6 rockets fired from the Palestinian faction. No casualties have been reported from the attacks so far. The military said it also struck a weapons manufacturing site of the Hamas group. Hamas has not yet responded to the Israeli claims. Israeli raids on the Gaza Strip have sharply increased ever since Tel Aviv signed a US-brokered peace pact with the UAE. The head of Hamas group, Ismail Haniyeh, says President Rajab Tayyip Erdogan has always pushed for intra-Palestinian reconciliation. Speaking to media in Istanbul, Haniyeh said Erdogan has been in favor of talks between Hamas and Fatah. He said the Turkish president wants the 2 Palestinian groups to end their division. Earlier this week, Erdogan received the Hamas leader in Istanbul. He also made a phone call to Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas, who welcomed Ankara's role to help them achieve a reconciliation. The 2 Palestinian groups have remained at odds since Hamas seized the Gaza Strip from Fatah in mid-2007. Russian President Vladimir Putin has pledged military support for Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko in wake of recent protests. In an interview, Putin said Russia has set up a reserve group of law enforcement officers to deploy if the situation in Belarus deteriorated. Putin also called on the authorities in Minsk and the opposition to find a way out of the crisis peacefully. Putin accused unidentified foreign forces of trying to win political advantages from the turmoil in Belarus. Immediately after Putin's remarks, NATO chief Jens Stoltenberg called on Moscow not to meddle in the crisis. He said Belarus is an independent state and no one should interfere in its domestic affairs. Meanwhile, Belarusian police detained about 20 journalists covering a protest in central Minsk. The Interior Ministry says journalists were taken to a police station for document checks and the ones with credentials will be released. In the US, 6 people have been killed as the Hurricane Laura left a trail of destruction across a wide swathe of the state of Louisiana. The National Hurricane Center says the Category 4 storm is the most powerful to hit Louisiana in about 164 years. Authorities said a teenage girl and an elderly man died when trees crushed their homes while another man drowned. Officials said the storm caused less havoc than forecasts had predicted and that it will take several days to assess the true extent of the damage. Packing winds of 240 kilometers per hour, the hurricane also knocked out power to over 1 million customers in Louisiana, Texas, and Arkansas. The authorities said Laura has downgraded to a tropical storm with maximum sustained winds of about 105 kilometers per hour. The storm is headed to Louisiana-Arkansas border and it is expected to drift into the Atlantic Ocean near Delaware on Saturday. The Libyan army says militias loyal to Commander Khalifa Haftar have violated a recently declared ceasefire. The UN-backed government and the rival Eastern-based parliament agreed to a truce just last Friday. In a statement, the army said the militant groups attempted to target troops with more than 12 Grad missiles. It said the operation of Sirte and Jufra will not hesitate to respond to these actions. Earlier, the Libyan government warned Haftar against continuing attacks in the cities of Sirte and Targheen. The UN says at least 887 civilians were killed across South Sudan between April and June. In its quarterly report, the UN mission in South Sudan documented more than 417 incidents of violence against civilians. The report said 531 others were wounded, 176 abducted, and 26 were subjected to sexual violence. It said during the first quarter of this year, in 2,275 incidents of violence, 658 civilians were killed. It said another 452 were injured, 592 abducted, and 65 were subjected to sexual violence. It disclosed that intercommunal violence involving community-based militias was the biggest cause of the conflict. U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo says sanctions on Iran will snap back from the 20th of September. Last week, the U.S. triggered the snapback mechanism after its bid to renew an arms embargo on Iran failed at the UNSC. In a series of tweets, Pompeo said the U.S. will oppose any resolution introduced by a UN Security Council member to continue sanctions relief. The U.S. push to snap back sanctions on Iran has been met with stiff resistance inside and outside the Council. Earlier, Pompeo delivered a letter to the Security Council President Thuranesh Dejani to formally invoke the process to reimpose UN sanctions on Iran. But Dejani dismissed the move, citing a lack of consensus within the Council. British airline Virgin Atlantic says it will start services between the UK and Pakistan in December. In a statement, the airline said its flights will go on sale next month. In a tweet, Virgin Atlantic said direct flights will be flown from Heathrow to Lahore and Islamabad. Additionally, the airline will operate direct flights to Islamabad from Manchester Airport. The announcement comes after the British Airways sought permission from Pakistan's aviation body to operate flights to Lahore. American retail giant Walmart says it is teaming up with Microsoft to acquire US assets of the Chinese social media app TikTok. This comes after TikTok CEO Kevin Mayer said he is leaving the company 3 months after his joining. Following the announcement, Walmart's shares surged by 5%. In a statement, the retailer said TikTok's integration of e-commerce and advertising is a clear benefit to creators and users. With Walmart's intention, it joins several others bidding on the tech company, including Oracle. TikTok's parent company, ByteDance, is close to an agreement to sell its US, Canadian, Australian, and New Zealand operations. United Airlines says it will have to cut 2,850 pilot jobs this year if the US government does not extend the aid package. In a memo to employees, the airline said the furloughs will take place between October and November. The airlines have asked the US government for another $25 billion to cover employee payroll through March. United agreed with the US government not to lay off employees till the end of September. Talks on a broader coronavirus assistance package in Washington have stalled as Congress struggled to reach an agreement. The Chicago-based United relies mostly on international travel, which is expected to take longer to rebound from the pandemic. European stocks are trading mixed as investors mull effects of Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe's resignation and a major policy shift by the US Federal Reserve. The US Fed said it will not change rate and will allow inflation and employment to run above target levels to support the economy. The pan-European stocks 600 dropped nearly 0.5%, with most sectors trading in the red. London's FTSE and Italy's FTSE MIB have gained fractionally. Frankfurt's DAX and Paris's CAC 40 have shed marginally. All stocks are trading virtually on and around the flat line. And now the weather situation from around the globe. And And that is all for now. For the latest updates, you can follow us on social media at Indus.News.